Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest Fintech Book Club. My name is Stessa Cohen. I'm here with Jim Perry and Effie Pilarino, and we're discussing Customer-Centric Innovation in Finance by Erin Taylor and Anette Broløs. Okay, so first of all, I want to ask you to put your questions and comments in questions, thoughts, comments in the LinkedIn chat, and we will see all of that. Um, as we go on, we'll be able to discuss them. I also would like to remind you that our next book discussion, and I'll remind you at the end, will be Friday, July 11th, same time, and we'll be discussing a new ethos in banking, embracing values and ethics for a meaningful transformation by Rick, who is the founder of the banking scene, and I dare not attempt his last name. So I don't want to mangle it.
Let's remark that these authors are European based. We have
Yeah,
two amazing ladies that the authors of the book that we will be discussing today that bring really a very fresh and different angle
yeah,
as they bring an anthropologist's research toolkit and a finance person's
yeah,
toolkit, and it's a unique combination.
yeah. And this is not a U.S. centric or European centric book club. So I think I prefer not to mangle someone's last name as somebody with a name that's not very common. So anyway, let's get started. Let's just start off talking a bit about who is this book for, a little bit, because I think that's an interesting question. Because it has the authors reference a lot of academic articles, but and research, and I don't feel that it is at all for academics. I mean, they might find it useful, but it's not at all for them. Thoughts?
Um, Effie, do you want to go first?
Yes, actually, that's a great way to set the scene, Stessa. And I think it's really an invitation to both the digitally natives that unintentionally might have alienated themselves as service providers from the actual end customer. And I'm talking more about, retail fintechs, the digitally natives, let's think of the neobanks and other service providers that, whatever they're serving, they might be peer-to-peer payments, they might be cards, whatever it is. If you think of it, too much digitalization alienates from the end customer. And here there's an invitation to think more broadly about how you understand your customer, because, okay, customer centricity and data driven ways of designing products and services and customers' experiences are fine, but the authors are really inviting these entrepreneurs in different departments to really consider nuances and what they call more qualitative understanding of the customers. And I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to talk about why this is important. And I think that the authors do a brilliant job of presenting many examples and use cases. And I personally loved a lot that this book is a reminder that we humans are not rational, right? Right, and that it is really a challenge, but a worthwhile challenge to understand our reasons, our behaviors, and why we do or don't do, certain transactions in financial services. And it's an invitation to understand that, because then the service providers can help us along the journey better,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
develop better customer experiences. And I find interesting, one of the highlights that the customers argued was that a lot of digital fintechers say, oh, the technology works, but the customers are not using it, and we need to educate them. And and somehow the authors are arguing that that is not uh, the right way to look at things. Customers
Hmm.
actually, we shouldn't underestimate their abilities to find solutions to challenges that they have, and when they need something, they will use the technology. And we have great examples, especially with mobile money and other examples. So I'll take a pause there, and maybe Jim, you'll want to add to this.
Well, one of the things I would initially add back to your original questions, Tessa, is I think this speaks to probably everyone in our audience. Whether you're a bank, whether you're a fintech, whether you're a venture capitalist, whoever you happen to be, it's been rather refreshing in a way because, for the last year or so, some of the books that we've been looking at and kind of reviewing have dealt with things like the metaverse and AI and the future of cash and all the rest, very tech heavy conversations. And so it's been kind of refreshing, as I say, to shift to a conversation about customer centricity. Especially, I find when I'm talking to audiences about the topic generally, is while we like to imagine ourselves as customer centric in terms of when we create a new product or a new service or even roll out a new technology, often we're really not. Our centricity is based on our institutional mindset. And it's
Right.
nice to recalibrate from time to time, and remind ourselves that we need to keep aligning our strategies with customer needs, customer preferences. And so this book certainly sets up a very nice conversation for anyone in financial services to kind of pivot their own perceptions. Stessa, what did you think?
Well, I think I agree with both of you, and I think it can be used as a strategy tool, an innovation tool, and
Mhm.
also a check on direction. Like, because fintechs, banks, even service providers need to be constantly innovating, pivoting, and changing, right? Because customers of all kinds, and I love that they don't look at just consumers, but also SMEs, which are really important. But I think it also applies to larger companies as well, because
Mhm.
they're always having to change and pivot. That everybody along this line can use this book as a tool. Like our other books, this is actually a tool, and
Mhm.
they literally at the end provide a toolkit. But you brought up VCs, and I thought that's a really interesting point. And in terms of venture capitalists, when they do their due diligence with a fintech, they should be looking at how do they know what the customer wants?
Right.
How do they know that customers want this product? Show us how you know. Um, and I think that's something that they overlook. Well, because it's all hype, or PFM, or whatever it is,
Right.
blockchain or buy now, pay later. How do you know that the target customer is somebody who wants this?
Mhm.
And
And
I have to
to,
say, yeah.
to that point, Stessa, the authors uh, make a remark that surveys where you ask people, to answer questions. I mean, they're not saying that they're not any good, but what they're saying is what matters more is what people actually do, because often again, because we're not rational. We say one thing, but we do another thing. So actions and behaviors speak louder than what your intention is, which
Yeah.
you follow up, or you know so
Yeah, I personally had a great affinity for this book because my first degree was in a subject that y- a lot of anthropologists moved into it, right? And so I learned about ethnographies as an undergraduate and the importance of that over data. We didn't look at data because it was a humanities course, but
Mhm.
no, we didn't look at data and the value of ethnography. I was like, oh, this like kind of warms my heart because it's good to see that human context becoming important. And I think also um, this book is a great. It's also a great has tentacles into all the other books that we've read,
Mhm.
right? So past and probably future, metaverse, AI, startups, innovation, even digital money and digital assets, because they talk, farther on in, later in the latter part of the book around digital ID, you know. So it's all connected, and the glue here is the observational. And you're right, Effie. I mean, it's not just, surveys around how you use your money, but probably other surveys when you start talking to somebody, they're like, oh, this is formal. I
I
need
love
to give the best light on my behavior,
I
Right.
love
right?
their kit called that handbag. What's it called? The portable kit study that
Right.
they go around and ask women specifically with their handbags to open up their handbags, and through that you see actually what are the behaviors that are related to economic activity, I guess, and therefore
Yeah,
finance. It's I find it fascinating.
yeah.
We
So
often,
go
I was
ahead.
just going to add, we often talk about maintaining relevance with the consumer. And so often, we're doing that on specific data points. We think we're aligning at that level, but often again, those data points only give a very limited snapshot of an upper level behavior that sometimes can miss completely the emotional cues. And I think often, um, we've talked a lot about sometimes our technology surpasses our humanity, but especially now as new tools are helping the actual acceleration of innovation. Oftentimes some of these new innovations are coming to the table without necessarily fully vetting the idea of, so who's going to want this?
Yeah, I just put up a comment about, VC and startup customers because I think this is an important part of our conversation around innovation. It's venture capital funds are like becoming harder to get for a number of reasons. And I think on the VC side, they need to be scrutinizing, as Jason pointed out, business models
Mhm.
in his book, but also, how do you know what the customer knows and how, what's, what is it? And, the other thing about customers is context. What customers do with mobile money in China or the Philippines is going to be different than how they use it in other places. And I think this is a reminder that you just simply can't copy and paste, oh, wow, they use X in Y place and just transport it again to wherever I am and it's going to be a success. Because it may not be the right context, it may not have value for customers, and understanding that is, I think, important to innovation. And many, I don't want to, downplay the fact that other books we've read, have made this point too, and I think
Mhm.
that underlining is becoming stronger, understanding context around innovation, and that's important as well. So, um,
A stark
I,
reminder, basically, that okay, technology, everything is available as a service, so to speak, and
right.
one provider can copy another one in terms of what they're offering, but where is the nuance, and where are you really catering to the specific group of people that you're serving?
Right. Right. How do customers in one context adapt something for their contextual needs that is different than customers the, would in another place. And it could even happen in the same country. For example, people look at the United States as one market, and it's many, many markets.
Right.
Rural people have different needs than people in suburbs that have different needs in cities and even within the city. And this kind of goes to something that also pleased me about their research in this book was that, identifying people who aren't served. What I've written about is hidden tribes, right? And they actually go into depth in this. I love the way they do is saying through qualitative study, you can identify these people that traditional demographic data that banks have, in particular, financial institutions have, doesn't get at, you know, the people who have a job but they may not, be using banking services. Why is that? You know, or they have a job but they don't have credit. Why is that? Or who is that? And why? And what are the relationships? They may not look like a traditional demographic group. And that's the key to innovation because
Right.
these are the services that financial services isn't providing. And why do people use payday lending when they could be using a bank? Because of whatever reason that is. And there are many examples of that, but I thought that was really powerful. Because that's something I've thought a lot about is this, every time I see a new product aimed at all women, right? I'm like, wow, that's a big category, you know?
Which makes
Exactly.
no sense as a category, by the way.
No, it doesn't. I mean, which women? Which women? And the hidden tribes concept is something I actually took from political um, theory, which identified people who actually have similar beliefs that may be in different groups or parties, but they're more similar to each other. So, you know, that concept is like, oh, wow, so somebody who is in Gen Z might have some requirements that are similar to somebody who's a boomer. But unless you look below all of that,
Yeah.
um,
Or a video gamer might have something similar with, I don't know, somebody who is a basketball player, or you know
exactly,
Well,
exactly,
and I think especially during Financial Literacy Month here in the U.S., it's important to have these conversations about the underserved and the unserved, because depending on the metrics that you use, again, we're talking about, you know, huge numbers of people from market to market that aren't being served. Even existing customer bases, there's so much data. First of all, in transactional information that can help a financial institution understand, we don't have a very deep relationship with this
right,
particular
right,
client. They are underserved from the standpoint that they only have one product or one service with us, when we could do so much better. But here's the interesting thing: some banks are actually out doing excuse me, ethnographic research. I'm not used to
Are
saying
they
that word.
really? Oh, wow.
Yes, I mean, so Umpqua Bank on the West Coast, they did a series of ethnographic studies before they rolled out their kind of branch model, and before they launched their mobile kind of where their mobile app was pairing up with a live banker. So long before they rolled those products out, they did exhaustive research and very simple things. I mean, Bank of America, I got an email from them about a year or so ago before they realized, oh, sorry, he's a consultant in the industry. We can't use him. But one of the things that they actively were recruiting at the time was to see if, as a Bank of America customer, would I be willing to serve on a panel for a year's time to
Oh,
have
wow.
conversations, to have, to allow them to dig more deeply into my behaviors and all the rest. And I thought, okay, there are some of the national and regional banks here in the U.S. that are deploying some of these strategies, but industry wide, that's not happening.
Right, right. I worked with a bank in Ethiopia, I guess last year and maybe the year before, around bringing their strategy up to date. And one of the things is we talked with them about was getting information from your customers. And they were hesitant, but we put a small survey into their branches because they had a lot of branches and a lot of people who use them for a variety of reasons. And you could immediately see what the problems were in the
Mhm.
branches because every customer said it the same thing and it was open-ended questions and and it becomes clear very easily. Oh, you want to transform the customer experience so that it's better, you have to fix this thing, one
Right,
small thing, and it could be transformative because people could get their transactions done. I mean, it's a different context in the US because they had to go to the branch, but when you start talking to people, you get that information that they're not going to give you necessarily in a survey where you say, "How was the service 1 to 5?"
right.
You know,
One of the other
that's
points
yeah.
I
Go
just
ahead.
wanted to add too that I was really excited to see the authors um, really made a point here that true innovation has to consider underserved populations. It was like so definitive and so direct, saying true innovation can't be just targeting, the upper 1% or those who are
Yeah.
managed mostly by wealth managers, that, across the industry, uh, there's a lot of work we could be doing.
Well, this is a huge thing, and I saw this when my son works in the restaurant industry,
Mhm.
and the one restaurant he was working at hired a lot of people who are recently really released from prison, right? So they needed a job,
Mhm.
and they didn't have bank accounts. The app that the owner used to onboard them, for W-2 and all that stuff, and to deposit everything directly, had a connection with a bank, so they could open a bank account not by going to a bank, but right there on their phone. And that kind of integration, like, totally sidesteps all the banks, and this restaurateur was serving a very important function in providing a way for people to coming out of confinement, getting their first job, making their money, starting a new life, and starting to do the financial things that'll help them stay on that path, right? Um, you know, even if they were, he wasn't paying them in cash, right? Because it was all direct deposit. So
Mhm.
they could know like when their money was deposited and all that stuff. But that underserved, I think banks, I think I wrote about this in my newsletter, but banks understanding that you have to go where the customers are, and it's often the small businesses, what services, and there are a few startups that look at, for example, formerly incarcerated people, what are their needs?
Mhm.
In the US, it can be really tough. You just get, dropped off and there's some money, but, it's can be tough. And I'm not saying banks should fund them, but how do you, help do that? What's the way that you what's the way that you do that? And, underserved, you could still be working full time. I mean, in the US in particular, this is a real issue, and not having housing, you know? I mean, how do you manage that? And I think one of the things that really struck me was that they were like, it's time to move beyond the social media posts that say, don't buy that latte.
Right, exactly.
You know, the education needs to be embedded in the services, not, do this, do that. Um, I think also on the flip side, I've seen some data that shows that even people moving up into high net worth, younger people, don't understand investments. And they don't want to learn it from a bot or, a website. They want to talk to a person.
Well, the one nice thing that the authors really do, whether they realize they were doing it or not, they challenge by their very gender the idea that we have to break free from some very paternalistic ways of providing services in the banking industry. Because I often think about how many times programs or services are being developed strictly from this like daddy knows best kind of approach. And it's like, folks, the world has grown way past that. And so innovation in this industry has to look at all of these things through a broader lens. We have to lean into deeper levels of research, deeper levels of understanding of the kind of emotional and contextual drivers of behavior.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
Jim, and you bring to mind one of the studies that was done by IBM. Paolo Cironi was sharing that, and it was like a list of what banks feel are the priorities of customers and
Mhm.
what customers feel are their priorities.
Right.
You would see the disconnect. It was just, very well done, just to show
Yeah.
how the top three priorities that banks have, thinking that those are, what the customers need.
Well,
Yeah,
that made me think of this question. Are customer journeys irrelevant? And this is a question not only for financial institutions, but for the digital banking vendors, because they sell that to banks. Banks apparently want it, you know, because those journeys are based on what bankers or vendors together with bankers decide, here's your life's financial journey, you know.
That
Um,
that's a great question, Steph, because I think that the way I tend to think of it, it's like they're still relevant, but we have to stop thinking about them as being linear. Um,
whose journey? I mean,
right,
if you
exactly.
is
yeah.
isn't
Yeah.
it,
The authors do a great job of myth busting. I'm actually looking at the book. I've put a mark in a section which is around financial inclusion,
yeah,
stress,
yeah.
and they have these five myths and myth busting, which I absolutely love. The first myth is financial inclusion reduces poverty. Okay. Uh, Formal financial services are inclusive, informal ones are not.
Mhm.
That's a myth,
Totally.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, the first one really was something I have to admit, admitted it here on live.
Yeah.
I believed in that myth around financial inclusion, reducing poverty, um, but clearly it's
Yeah,
not.
but it's not. And if you look at the statistics of financial inclusion as measured, because it's how you measure it,
Mhm.
by the the reduction in the number of people that don't have bank accounts globally, I'm talking, and there has been a major reduction, right,
Mhm.
over the
Hmm.
past, let's say, 5 years. But
Hmm.
have we reduced poverty? No.
no, and that's
So, because it's a much more complicated issue than what we believe. And as I mean, the question is, are banking providers focused on reducing poverty, or are they focused on offering financial products like a bank account, like a credit card, like a savings account? Is this, again, going back to the basics, are they pushing products and transactions versus trying to solve problems like get me out of poverty, help me attain my dream, whatever that is, in every phase of your life? And they're not
yeah,
thinking like that.
And
yeah,
several, I mean, at least several tech providers, fintech, are reminding the industry continually that through technology, we can actually reach more of the underserved in ways that align with what they actually need, to at least give them a new tool to manage their financial lives a little bit better.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's, I think a lot of times, you know, banks don't see an opportunity for growth by meeting the needs of the underserved, but technology actually makes it much more possible for those things to coexist.
yeah. But also at the same time, they pointed out that sometimes the technical infrastructure prevents them from using certain technologies. For example, if you have weak Wi-Fi signals or you don't have
Oh,
strong enough
right,
Wi-Fi infrastructure, how can you use mobile money? Will
right.
people adopt it? I thought that was really, really important. I mean, one of the reasons, for example, that cloud-based core processing took off in countries in Africa, is because the weather conditions, destroys hardware,
Yes.
and so it makes more sense to put it in the cloud, right, than trying to keep up a data center. But, those services, understanding that context and what the infrastructure um, is just part of it, how people actually move. Like, the assumption, well, we're going to bring mobile money to X place because we have this great technology and then people can move the money. Well, they're actually doing it. And how are they already doing it is important. I think the other piece of it was the communication slash marketing of this whole thing. And, you see this in developed markets, and developing markets are like, we're just going to roll this out and we don't have to tell anybody about it because it's so great. They'll just use it. But how will people know? How do we market it? How do we let them know it's available? How do they know how to use it? Right? And that might be different for different groups, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a story I've told about, my mom going into a bank. She was in her 80s. I was with her, and we were doing some other transaction, and the guy at the desk started telling her how she could now not go to the teller because they were rolling out tablets that she could go up to at the branch.
Mhm.
And she started having a panic attack.
Right.
If he had looked at her product set, he would know that she didn't need this. That, that she didn't have an ATM card. She didn't use online banking or mobile banking. She went to the teller. It wasn't going to cost them any more to have her go to the teller to do her transactions, but they might lose the customer not understanding her facility of how she did things. She got everything she needed to get done. It wasn't complicated, but they were introducing this complication that this particular customer didn't need, you know? Um,
The
And it's very relevant now with AI too,
Mhm.
because some
yeah,
people will be extremely happy to adopt all these, let's say,
right,
chat bots and so on, and others not. And you have to do the qualitative research and not shove it, down the throat of everybody, or, have this is our offering, period,
right,
because it's
right.
more
Or
efficient,
you're yeah, or
right?
you're Gen Z, so you must be digital. Like my daughter uses for to get into the Y, the gym. they have a plastic card with a barcode on it. She uses that. I have the app, So, she's 18 and I'm older and I'm using the app and she's not. She doesn't even have the app on her phone. I'm like, why don't you use the app? She goes, it's so boring. Why would I do that? Um, so that assumption, oh, she's going to use the app, but me, I'm not going to, is like really wrong.
Well,
I've already, you know, it's crazy.
I was going to say, for me, the biggest takeaway from this book is it invites us to continue to move away from generalization, right? It says, look,
Nuances.
we're hearing enough from consumers, generally speaking, that they expect personalization. Well, that has to move to the next level. Yes,
Right.
we can use data to have a deeper understanding, but let's lean into this kind of idea of research to really understand the needs and desires and the preferences and the emotions,
Right.
behind
Exactly.
how finances work in our society today.
Yeah. So I just wanted to just take a break and ask people if they had any questions for us or any comments to put them in now. We'd love to put them up on the screen and answer some questions if you have them as we're kind of starting to wrap up a little bit, um,
Well,
on this particular book discussion. But those are good points. I mean, really, if everything's about personalization, how can you not personalize by actually understanding the humans, the people, and the companies themselves? What do you really need, SME to grow or home based business? How do you grow from a food truck to a restaurant, right?
I talk a lot about the fact that right now about 40% of small business owners in the US are baby boomers, and about half of those
Interesting.
don't have an exit strategy, because they're not, they're not thinking in those terms. And then all of a sudden one day they think, I'm just tired and I'm ready to retire, and they shut their business down because they haven't had the kind of conversations with banks and credit unions and financial providers that have allowed them to really do that. But on the other side of that coin, you know, the financial service providers aren't talking to their customers about that, their small business customers about that. They're not understanding that that's where they are in this phase of their life, and that clock
Right.
is definitely ticking.
Yeah, yeah. How do you hand it off to a family member? How do you sell? What do you do?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
Effie, what would be your takeaways from this book?
My takeaway from this book is really this idea that we what we said in the beginning, we've digitalized a lot of services because we've scaled these fintechs, and a lot of incumbents have had to follow, and we've evolved in that behavior. But we need to do more qualitative research and understanding in the behavior of consumers, whether it's retail or businesses, and respond to that rather than just thinking, okay, we can make money with this product, or we can serve this underserved group. And again, make money because more volume, more transactions, we can grab that market share. So it's time really to go deeper and have a more mature market everywhere and more nuanced. Let's stop
Yeah,
copying only. Let's just, when deploying these SaaS technologies that are everywhere, what's the differentiation? And
right,
only a qualitative understanding, and an understanding deeper that we are humans. So personalization is more about what are the incentives, the emotions, what do we really need? Are you serving and serving my life, not just the transaction part of it? I think they make a
Yeah.
great point there. And I'm more excited about not these hyperscaler fintechs that are grabbing the headlines and will hopefully IPO and open up some liquidity
Maybe.
in the market. Maybe it will happen. Everything is
Right.
just a matter of time. As I like to say, the first 100 years are difficult in our life, and then everything is okay. So sooner or later, right? It will happen. But really, it's about the examples where you see these nuances, where you see a gem, where a beautiful flower where you didn't expect it, and they're really changing the lives of
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a commenter, Maria Luisa Kuhn, who made a point that financial services should teach, not only sell. And I think that's a good point. And part of that is creating, and we didn't really touch on this, is the last part of the book is around creating a research organization.
Yes.
Oh
And
yeah.
I think this is really where, the takeaway, I think, is that this is a good read and analysis, and that take it away is that you need to go into your organization. I think we all agree it's not just banks, financial institutions, but venture capital firms, tech providers, fintechs, and not just create a research silo, because I think banks I know already have that. They're
Right.
very good at that.
Right.
But how to build that is part of strategic development. How do you build this into your strategy? That is, we're doing research, and our strategy says SMEs. Well, which SMEs? Where? Who? Why? And that will make a more innovative approach, I think. The other aspect that I thought was a good takeaway was around collaboration. Not
Mhm.
only collaboration across the enterprise around research and qualitative research, but collaboration with customers, as Jim pointed out, as Effie pointed out. Who are the customers you serve or want to serve?
Mhm.
Who are they and what are their needs? How are they doing what they're doing? And how can you fix, what are those pain points? Not the pain points you think, well, on your journey, we have to just wait until you get married to do that. Or in a country where there's a high level of divorce or any divorce, like, that's part of your journey.
Right.
How do you manage that? So I think that's for me the two takeaways. I collaboration, and this connects back to our other books as well, is
Mhm.
hard in an environment that's siloed and traditionally bound as an organization.
And not
Did you have
another
another comment?
that came to mind as I'm listening to you, Stessa, is the authors um, talked about how money is emotional, how we are irrational, and that's not taken into account in many products. And they talked about the fact that we are social animals, and if you think of it, the only social financial product is a joint account. And I thought of that, when you spoke about the divorces,
Yeah.
uh, and
Yeah.
and nothing else. We've maybe some fintechs are trying to have these family type of services circles, but we need more of that. And
Yeah.
it needs to be customized. Again, we need innovation that is true innovation, and not just a small extrapolation of what we already have.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
it has to always evolve, right?
oh,
Yeah.
Because
Or yeah.
so
Yeah.
often I see people making choices and decisions based on perceptions and data about consumers from before the pandemic. It's like, sorry, folks, that horse has left the barn.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that's exactly true. So um, I want to thank everybody for showing up today for the discussion and for watching this video afterwards. Again, a reminder, our next book discussion will be Friday, July 11th, same time, same bat channel. We'll be discussing a new ethos in banking, embracing values and ethics for a meaningful transformation. So go look it up at your favorite place, bookstore, online, offline, and get a copy, read it, and come discuss with us because this isn't just the three of us or the four of us with Barb McLean, who's usually with us. Um, it's you as well. Everybody's welcome to discuss through comments. The other thing I wanted to remind you is that have you got a book coming out? Are you a fintech author? Or do you know of a really good book that's coming out that we should be aware of and we should read? Drop a comment on the LinkedIn page, not here in the comments because you might not see it, but on our LinkedIn page, Fintech Book Club. Follow us, get notified for all of our book club events, and also for the videos so you can catch up and see a discussion that maybe you weren't able to attend. So I want to thank everybody again for, logging on to our discussion of customer-centric innovation in finance, which if you haven't read it, you can pick up like anywhere you get books and, be on top of, how your organization can become actually customer-centric through qualitative research and analysis.
Stretch
So
your thinking around customer centricity,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, if your organization, bank, vendor, fintech, whether you're a founder or an EVP, if you want to innovate, I think this needs to be in your library and in your
Yep.
toolkit.
Yeah.
So thanks again, everyone, and we'll talk to you in 3 months. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.